By the early 13th century BC, the Eastern Mediterranean was dominated by two major powers. One of them, of course, was ancient Egypt, under the leadership of the now immortalised Ramses II, and the Egyptians looked north to the Levant for expansion. To the north, though, lay the other major empire in the region, the Hittites, based in Anatolia, or modern-day Turkey, and they had extended their influence southwards into the Levant. The two sides would inevitably come to blows, as all empires do in this kind of situation, provided you don't put a little bit of Afghanistan between you. And it would be in May 1274 BC that they would lock horns in the largest chariot battle in history. But, and here's the fun part, who actually won it? Who won the Battle of Kadesh? You might be shocked to know we don't really have an answer to that question, because it's kind of nobody and everyone at the same time. Welcome back to the Ancient Connection, where today we will jump back even further in time than we have already to ancient Egypt, as we discuss the Battle of Kadesh. Was it Ramses II's greatest victory, or was it simply just another engagement in an inconclusive war? For generations prior to Kadesh, Egypt had engaged in repeated campaigns across the Levant, attempting to spread their influence and control over the lucrative region. In earlier centuries, pharaohs such as Thutmose III had campaigned in the Levant against local states, including the city of Kadesh, and under Seti I, Ramses' father, Egypt had even briefly captured the city of Kadesh itself. But this control was short-lived, and the Hittites did manage to take it back. By the middle of the reign of Ramses II, though, Egypt again was attempting to assert control over vassal states like Amurru in southern Syria, and this began to concern the Hittites. In response to the renewed Egyptian expansion, Hittite king Muwatalli II mobilized an army and prepared to confront the Egyptians near Kadesh, hoping to blunt the Egyptian advances and protect his own sphere of influence and perhaps, cut the Egyptians down a peg or two. Somebody would have to give here, but here's the thing. We're dealing with two immensely strong personalities in their respective monarchs. So there's only really going to be one way this is going to end, and it's not going to be peaceful and singing Kumbaya. The Egyptians were organised into several divisions named after gods and regional cults: Amun, Re, Set, and Ptah. Together with auxiliary troops, it is likely, and this included hired mercenaries from the local areas and perhaps a bit further away, but we're not 100% sure. In total, Ramses II commanded a force we think of about 16,000 infantry and about 2,000 chariots. Each of these chariots was drawn by multiple horses and crewed, generally speaking, by two men, namely a driver and an archer. On the other side of the battlefield, the Hittites and their allies could muster, we think, approximately 2,500 chariots, although we do know all these infantry forces did not engage directly in that initial clash. One thing to note about the Hittites is their chariots were generally bigger, heavier, and had more than two crew. Hittite allies included rulers from across Syria and Anatolia, such as Stalemate of Aleppo and others, and it's a reflection on just how big the Hittite Empire actually was at this period, and, the fact it's fielding a larger army is not shocking. Leading the two armies were two monarchs who themselves were no strangers to combat or battle. Ramses had, for instance, inherited a strong military tradition in his family, and he had spent much of his reign on campaign or consolidating power. Muwatalli had also spent much of his reign defending the expanding Hittite Empire's interests against encroaching rivals. So really, we've got two armies here that are relatively comparable with seasoned leaders. It was going to be a hell of a fight. 4 years into his reign, Ramses captured the city of Amurru, and this bolstered Egypt's position in Syria. The following May, he launched a deliberate campaign northward from his capital of Pi-Ramses towards the city of Kadesh. His army was increasingly confident, and its size and training gave it even more backing and confidence in the campaign going forward. Ramses advanced them through narrow passes across ridges towards the Orontes River. It was the goal of this campaign to seek a decisive engagement with the Hittites and knock them out of the region. Unbeknownst to Ramses, Muwatalli had positioned his forces in expectation of the Egyptian advance. To deceive the Egyptians, Hittite agents disguised themselves as nomads. They approached the Egyptian advance parties with false information, and they claimed that the Hittite main army was far away in Aleppo, still preparing itself. It was afraid to fight. It was divisive. It was unruly. The command was falling apart. After all, it was an army of, well, dozens and dozens and dozens of different leaders, different cultures. So naturally, it's quite a believable thought that, hey, this army may not be altogether as strong as I thought it was. Ramses bit into this. He trusted the reports, and he continued his march. Eventually, he split his army into divisions to do it faster, and he stretched it out along the road. Having successfully misled the Egyptians, though, the Hittites launched a sudden and devastating assault on the division of Ray, and then on others as they neared the Orontes. These forward Egyptian troops were caught off guard, and the Hittite chariots, generally heavier and crewed by 3 men, as I mentioned before, were able to smash through the disorganized Egyptian advance guard, threatening the life of Ramses himself. Now, according to Egyptian accounts, preserved on temple walls, Ramses found himself temporarily isolated at this point with very few troops around him. According again to Egyptian accounts, and please keep in mind these are monuments built after the fact by Ramses, so they're definitely Egyptian propaganda, he, Ramses, allegedly rallied a handful of chariots who were nearby and men, and pressed forward in a great big assault against the Hittite line, overwhelming the odds and charging straight through it to avoid destruction and to link up with other Egyptian forces, leading his men to a glorious victory. Now, this clearly plays into the whole divine right of the pharaoh myth, so take it with not just a grain of salt, maybe like an ocean's worth of salt. Modern historians, though, we tend to take a more nuanced approach here. While it's likely that Ramses did lead a counterattack, as would have been his job as the commander on the field, and it's likely this attack stabilized his line, the notion that he single-handedly turned the tide, well, I don't need to say it, it's exaggerated. Nevertheless, what did play a crucial role in the battle was the fact that the Egyptian chariots were lighter and more maneuverable than the Hittite counterparts, and once they were coordinated, they were able to move effectively along the riverbank to stop further attacks from the Hittites. What makes the Battle of Kadesh especially remarkable is that it's the earliest battle for which we actually have this kind of detailed information about tactics and formations and real doctrines. I'm talking about light and heavy chariots here like they're light and heavy tanks from the Second World War. Both sides relied heavily on chariots as mobile platforms for archers and light infantry support, and they used them tactically in combination with their infantry. On top of that, we see the difference in doctrine when it comes to the chariots themselves. For example, the Egyptian chariots generally emphasize speed and flexibility, while Hittite chariots are heavier and operated by larger crews. This meant that the Hittite chariots were stronger on the charge, but they were slower to maneuver. On the flat plains near the Orontes, both styles could be proven effective provided their commanders understood their weaknesses and strengths, and on the day, it appears that the Egyptians held the upper hand. The Hittite tactic of ambush is fascinating too, as it succeeded initially by exploiting the spread out Egyptian columns. The Egyptians, though, eventually organised their defence around the pharaoh and surviving divisions and used their chariots in very well planned out and thought counterattacks and blocking formations to regain cohesion in their infantry line. But, dear viewer, you may be wondering, this is all great and fun to know, but who actually won? That's kind of complicated. After the alleged heroics by the Egyptian pharaoh, the battle itself kind of devolved into hours of brutal fighting and in general a massive stalemate. Neither Ramses or Muwatalli could secure an outright victory or breakthrough. The Hittites realized the futility of the situation, and knowing they could not actually break the Egyptian army or secure Kadesh, made the decision to withdraw. But here's the fun part. The Egyptians too realized they were unable to take the city of Kadesh, and eventually they too pulled back to reorganize. Both sides claimed success, and they were both right here. The Hittites stopped the Egyptians from seizing Kadesh and using it as a base, and the Egyptians stopped the Hittites from doing the exact same thing. Ramses wasn't going to let the truth get in the way of a tremendous story though, and his tremendous victory, and he portrayed the outcome as a glorious Egyptian triumph in his monuments, while the Hittites stressed that the region of Kadesh remained firmly in their hands and not the Egyptians. Strategically, the battle did genuinely nothing. It left the position of both empires largely unchanged. Amurru and Kadesh remained within the Hittite fold, while Egyptian control north of the Orontes remained tenuous. what was most significant in the long term was not the battle itself, but the recognition by both powers that continued hostilities would prove costly and indecisive. Almost 15 years after the battle, Ramses II and the new Hittite king Hattusili III, sorry, I apologize, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, concluded what is known as the Egyptian-Hittite Peace Treaty. Now, this document, well, it's a tablet that is engraved, so I'm using the term document loosely here. It's actually one of the oldest surviving international peace treaties in history. There is a popular naming convention that calls this the Treaty of Kadesh as well, but it should mention that the surviving fragments we have of this treaty don't actually mention the battle at all. The treaty itself, though, what it does is establish a mutual non-aggression status between the two powers, and it stipulates that both empires would assist each other in case of internal rebellion or external threat, while sharing the contested region along already established lines. Now, you may be wondering why these two powers were so ready to accept such nicey nice terms after being at war for so long, and that really comes down to shifting priorities. Egypt began to face threats from the Sea People and their raiding, while the Hittites were increasingly being pressured by the rising Assyrian Empire to the east in what would be called modern-day Iraq. This treaty was very much a case of pragmatic diplomacy. The Battle of Kadesh, though, holds enduring importance not because it decided the fate of empires or because it was this massive victory, but because it offers such a rare insight into ancient military strategy, diplomacy, and propaganda. It stands, like I said, as the earliest recorded battle in history to this level of detail where we know commanders' names, tactics, army compositions, and the diplomatic aftermath that is reasonably well documented. Hell, I was able to explain it to you like I was talking about panzer maneuvers in France in 1940. And for something that happened over 3,000 years ago, that is insane, and it makes it so important and special. This is largely down, though, thank you, to Ramses II's extensive inscriptions on temple walls due to his obsession with building things and the fact he had a very long reign. Inscriptions can be taken from Abu Simbel to Karnak, but because of these works, so often the Egyptian side of events is taken at face value, namely the Pharaoh's version. And this is something that does continue into this day. There was an exhibition I travelled to recently on Ramses II, and during that exhibition, it did flat out blankly state that Ramses II had won the Battle of Kadesh. Now, when we look at this a bit more critically, and we actually look at the fact that no real territory changed hands, it's not a tactical change, it's not a strategic change, that no side achieved its goal, when their goal was outright conquest, that kind of takes that away from Ramses II. If Ramses' goal was simply to defend Egypt from an attacking army, well then maybe you can make the argument that he did win a great victory. However, that we know that Egypt wanted to press forward in the Levant because it had, well, done it for years at this point, like under his father. So at that point you have to go, well, it's a tremendous Hittite victory because they defended the north. At the same time, then you have to remember that the Hittites were looking at expansion themselves, most likely. So you could sort of see what I mean here, that nobody really won, but nobody really lost. And the Hittites did go absolutely out of their way to remind everyone that they still controlled the cities that they still controlled, that Egypt did not take them. So, Kadesh. Today, we can take these sources, the Egyptian ones, less at face value, and we can examine them critically, aware that they served a purpose more than they served an accurate, unbiased version of history. At the end of the day, it was propaganda, but it's still very useful propaganda that we can learn a lot from, and when you couple it with archaeology from the site and the Hittites, well, you've got an absolute treasure trove and goldmine of what is possibly one of the most important battles in the study of history. This video was a bit shorter than usual for the ones on this channel, but I hope you did enjoy it, nonetheless. I tend to not study Egyptian history a lot, or at all. Like I said, when I started this channel in the posts, my focus is Roman history and Greek history, and that was my area of ancient studies. But you can't deny Egyptian history, it's got this certain allure to it, and it's been fascinating people for quite literally thousands of years. You've got ancient historians in the Roman Empire, for example, because they can't get enough of Egypt. So I get it. Also, I grew up watching, cartoons with Egyptians in them, so yeah, can't really say no to that. But I hope you all enjoyed it. I love this story. Like, comment, subscribe, And thank you all for coming, and I'll catch you next time.